just press record and we're going to get a go. Can you all see my screen, folks? I shared it at the beginning so I could get all my stuff set up on my secondary screen and my main screen there with the PowerPoint presentation. So I would just like to see that there is a video background as we go into the unknown. I'm just going to point that out, that it's a background and it's good. So thank you very much. I'm just going to admit Hazel, she's asked to come in. So first and foremost, we're going to start and then we're going to go backwards. So first and foremost, what is a scale? Again, definitions are useful, but only to a point. So any set of musical notes ordered by fundamental frequency or pitch is a scale. Okay, not particularly useful. It's quite generic as a definition. Basically, it's any set of musical notes is a scale. But we know, if we know a little bit about a scale, that's not what we mean when we say a scale. Okay? Again, what is a scale? It's where most or all of the melody and harmony of a musical work is built using the notes of a single scale, which can be conveniently represented on a staff or a stave with a standard key signature. Well, that's very useful, apart from what if you don't know what a key signature is? That doesn't help with the definition. Any definition which requires you to understand a different thing that needs its own definition can be less useful. There's words in there that we may well not necessarily 100% understand. Melody, harmony, scales, staffs, key signatures. Okay, so there's other words there. So there is no perfect definition of any of often these kind of musical things. Again, what is a scale? A musical scale represents a division of the octave space into a certain number of scale steps, a scale step being the recognizable distance or interval between two successive notes of the scale. It's interesting to use a definition for what a scale is by using the word scale. So again, a definition that features the word you're trying to define is sometimes not overly useful either. But again, so there's some definitions about what a scale is. So therefore, I've just kind of picked up on a few of the bits here of like to help us understand this. This is where we go backwards into the land of physics. What is a sound wave? That's where we're going to start off. What is sound? Okay, I'm going to be brief on this. And again, this is a hopefully understandable way of putting this out. Sound is measured in hertz or cycles per second. So that's the first thing. It's measured. Sound is measured. It's a frequency. Musical and non-musical sounds all have a frequency. They have their hertz, their cycles per second. Okay. In fact, most sounds have multiple frequencies going off at the same time. So, for example, if I was to drop a brick on the floor, it would have a sound. That would not just make one sound. It wouldn't be a pure frequency. There would be lots of different frequencies, and that is what makes the non-musical sound of like a brick hitting the floor. If I dropped a brick on the floor, you wouldn't go, "Ooh, that was a middle C." It is a non-musical sound. Okay. When we talk about musical sounds, it's when we are generally trying to put out one specific frequency or the perception of one frequency, and we hear it as a musical note because we're focusing around a specific frequency as opposed to a sound that is basically across the frequency spectrum. Okay, a sound wave is made up, and this is again by compression and rarefaction. Okay, now I will explain what that is. This tuning fork slightly shows this. If you hit a tuning fork, the tines of the tuning fork vibrate. As those tines vibrate, and this is just a little GIF, but it served a purpose. What happens is it compresses the particles in the air. As that part of the tuning fork moves, it compresses part of the particles in the air, and that therefore sends those particles of air moving. Okay. And each time that tuning fork goes the opposite direction, because vibration happens longitudinally, it goes one way and another. Okay. It therefore creates low pressure. So you basically get little pockets of high pressure. High pressure, which is compression, and low pressure areas which is rarefactions. Now, if I just go through this, and I'll go through this and then we can ask some questions if there's anything that's not sticking. But again, that picture shows it. When that tuning fork therefore moves, it basically squishes some of the air together, and therefore you've got high pressure and low pressure. Now, the high pressure areas here, and if you can see here, can you see my mouse, by the way, wiggle waggling on the screen? Excellent, that's cool. So the compressions are where the particles are closer together. And that's been caused by the vibration of that tuning fork, or the vibration of our voice, or the vibration of our brick falling on the floor. Okay? The rarefactions are where that tuning fork has gone the opposite direction and caused there to be low pressure. Okay? There's still the same number of particles in that amount of space, but they're into high and low frequency, high and low pressure waves within that frequency. Does that make sense? Okay. And the picture hopefully gives you an idea, and that is therefore a sound wave. Now, we mostly display sound waves like a sine wave, so the uppy downy thing that we see here. That's how we often see sound represented. Okay, if you ever see like a sound generator or tone generator, you will see the uppy and downy. Yeah. Now, it's very useful to see sound that way, but we do need to be careful not to confuse the actual way sound works, which is the top picture, okay, with the fact that sound waves don't go up and down in real life. Like when I speak, the sound doesn't go up in the air and then go down in the air and then go up in the air and then go down in the air. It is just a way we illustrate that to be understandable. Does that make sense? So sound waves don't go up and down. They're not wibbly wobbly. Okay, they don't wibbly wobbly like a wave. We draw them as a wave because we want people to understand what they are, and actually a wave kind of shows you, whereas the wave goes up, that shows the compression, as the wave goes down, that shows the rarefaction, okay? But it's a different visual way, because this way here is a relatively, it's a correct way of showing it, but it's not very useful if we're looking at it in combination with other frequencies, yeah? Does that make sense? So just don't think, I don't want you going away thinking that sound, if we were to be able to see it, it would be like an uppy downy roller coaster thing that goes up and down through the air. It doesn't, okay? And also, although sound goes in one direction, we know sound goes in three-dimensionally. It goes outwards. So if you were to think it's like a three-dimensional pebble falling in a three-dimensional pond. If you imagine a pebble, if I drop a pebble in the middle of a pond, ripples go outwards, but they only go out one direction. Sound, if you imagine dropping a pebble, it goes through all the way around, three-dimensionally. So it goes outwards in all directions. Obviously, there is direction of my sound, but if I talk one direction and you're standing behind me, you can still hear that. If I'm in an open space, obviously you can hear less of that because the sound is going more in one direction, but there is still, you know, the sound out of my mouth does go from lots of direction outwards, okay? It's why microphones work the way they do, is that microphones will pick up from a certain direction. Some microphones will pick up everything around you, omnidirectional. Some microphones will be more unidirectional and pick up from one direction, okay? So sound isn't just like a laser beam. We sometimes tell singers to sing like a laser beam and put it in one direction. That doesn't actually affect how the sound comes out of your mouth, okay? So if I stand to the side of you, I can still hear you, even if you're trying to laser beam. It's not like you send a torch light, and if I'm not in front of the torch, I can't hear anything, because we know that's not the case, okay? So sound does have a three-dimensional aspect to it. Now, what happens when it hits your ear? Okay, and I'm going through this quickly, but just wanted to make sure you got this. When sound waves hit your eardrum, it initially makes your eardrum compress. Now, that is not what your eardrum looks like. Your eardrum is not blue, okay, as far as I'm aware, though I've never seen one. Maybe it is. When the sound wave hits your eardrum, okay, it basically makes that eardrum go inwards with that pressure, okay? When the rarefaction's there, it basically then pulls that eardrum back out again. And so as those high pressure hit your eardrum, that therefore vibrates in the same frequency that the tuning fork did, okay? So the energy from the tuning fork goes ding, it travels with those high and low pressure sound waves, the compression, the rarefaction to your eardrum, then picks that up, vibrates the same amount of times per second, and your brain converts that into a musical sound. Okay, so your brain has to take that analog signal and convert it into a digital signal into your brain to understand what that sound sounds like. Okay, So we might think of it as a musical note. That's how we perceive it. Okay, so that's basically how it works. The number of times though that high pressure wave hits your ear is the frequency, measured in times it hits you per second. So if I was to give you a note and you were to get that was to happen 100 times a second, we would hear that 100 times a second movement, and it gets converted into a sound. Okay, we convert that in our brain, converts those vibrations per second, cycles per second. We measure them in hertz, because the man who discovered this and found upon this science is named after him, Hertz. That's what we call it as. So first and foremost, everything we're talking about is frequency, and we are measuring it in hertz, and that's generally how sound works. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. It doesn't matter if you a little bit scratch your head at that point, but I did want to cover that because the next bit we go through, I'm going to refer back to frequency. And if we don't understand what frequency and sound waves are, we're not going to really understand the next bit either. At this point, are there any questions on any of that, or anything you want me to re-go through? Lynn W.
Can I just ask if you can make the link between sound waves and frequency with those weird digital audio video tracks that you produce for the sound, each part? With the line moving across.
With the light, yeah, kind of. The high frequency. So imagine, I'll give the pebble analogy again, although you have to imagine it's a three-dimensional pond. Okay, goes in all directions. If I drop a little pebble in a pond, that little pebble will create lots of little waves. Those waves will be closer together. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then imagine that little pebble is a high frequency sound. High frequency, little pebble in pond, lots of little waves. Doesn't mean they've got less energy, by the way. So I know in a little pebble in a pond it would have less energy. High frequency don't actually have less energy. They have the same amount of energy, but sometimes we don't hear them as well. High frequencies. Low frequencies travel further. And I won't get into the science of that either. Imagine a big rock going in. That would form big waves, okay? That would be a lower frequency. So basically, they might be like, they are bigger waves, and they therefore are lower because that rock is lower. It's not a perfect analogy, that one, because the whole point of if you drop a large rock in a pond, it obviously has more energy, and the waves are not only longer, they're actually more powerful and they're bigger. Sound, again, is not quite like that. You can have a really powerful high frequency and a really weak low frequency, okay? And again, I'm not going to go too much into volume. Volume is measured in decibels, and again, that's how loud something is, but it's going to get confusing if I go into that right now. But yeah, so basically you can see sound waves on my Cubase thing. Sometimes if you're in the background, you can see basically how loud something is. It doesn't really give you a very good sense until you zoom really into that sound wave, that it then does. You can see the waves go up and down, and the how high they go up is the volume. Okay, is basically how loud that thing is. So if they're only going up and down a little bit, that's quiet. If they're up and down a lot, that's loud. The distance between them is the frequency. So if they're really, really close together, that's high frequency. If the actual curves are a lot shallower, that is low frequency. So you can kind of look at those sound waves I use on Cubase in my videos and kind of get an idea. But sometimes you have to really zoom into these things to see the representation of the waves, knowing that sound isn't actually a wave, it's compression and rarefaction. So that's...
I had a question about the eardrums.
Yes, Susan.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to raise my hand on Zoom, so I just yelled.
Oh, that's fine. No worries.
I'm sorry. Okay, so when the sound waves, when the frequency is out of our range of perception.
Yeah.
Okay. So are our eardrums still going in and out, and our brain is not perceiving it? Or where's the breakdown? Or is it that our eardrums are not doing this?
Well, again, I would say, and I'll liken this to a speaker. If some speakers are very good at picking about reproducing low sound. So if you think of a subwoofer that's like a big speaker, and It's very good at reproducing low sound. And you think the little ones that are often made of metal on a speaker, called the tweeters, they're very good at doing high frequency sound. Now, your ear is very good at both of those. As we get older, and I'm not a medical practitioner, as we get older, often our eardrum will become less flexible and less efficient, and actually it won't pick up those frequencies as well. Does that make sense? So actually it will lose, it'll be basically, it's a bit old. And if you ever think of an old speaker, if you ever plugged an old speaker and you turn the volume up, it starts distorting and it starts basically making a funny noise, and it isn't accurately. Or you go into a supermarket and their speaker's a bit old and knackered, and as soon as the certain, you'll notice certain frequencies on speakers is when they go wrong, and they'll make a funny buzzing noise at a certain frequency. So yeah, 1 second, sorry, I'll just, someone said when they're doing questions that you should take my screen down, so hopefully you can see me. So yeah, so that is how your ears will slightly work as well. You might sometimes, your ears won't be good at picking up a certain frequency. When you're younger, those high frequencies you can definitely pick up, 19 kilohertz, 20 kilohertz. The older you get, your ears get less and less able to hear those high frequencies. Yes, Denise?
Yeah, that reminds me of a fun test that I saw in an app that was doing that with certain frequencies. Yeah. And my sons could hear the tone. I'm going like, you're playing with me. You hear that? I can't hear it. I thought it was so strange.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, and again, there is, and that's why some of those, in some countries, they use high frequency generators to stop young people congregating in certain areas. So they'll have a tone generator which basically sends out a high-pitched 19 kilohertz, which only people under the age of 21 can hear. And this is actually true because it's uncomfortable for them to stand near it. But most of us can't even hear it. So I wouldn't be able to hear it. So I'd walk past there. I wouldn't even hear it. Someone who's maybe 15, 16 would walk past there and it would be like, oh, what's that? And actually it's used as a deterrent for congregating in certain areas. So yeah, as we get older, the high frequency especially, but also low frequency ability to hear those things does change. And I think, as far as I'm aware, that's as the eardrum gets less elasticity and is less able to pick up those vibrations as you get older. Tim B.
Yeah, so it's not just the drum, is it, Sam? It's the way the ear digitizes the signal into an electrical pulse with is it the hammer and the anvil, the little bones?
Yeah, the hammer and the anvil, yeah.
They also get much more worn and less sensitive, which is, again, why you lose the higher pitch, higher frequencies.
Yeah. So yeah, when I say eardrum, obviously the entire mechanism of the eardrum, the basically the way it turns the physical power of that audio signal, and it turns it into vibration to then a digital signal, which then goes into your brain. All of that basically becomes slightly less efficient and works slightly less well, so we can't hear as well. But yeah, so again, like I said, I'm okay on quite a lot of that information, but I've never seen the inner parts of the ear, apart from knowing that my own ear has probably got too much wax in it, which is why I sing too loud. Now, just moving on from there. I'll just share my screen again. So that takes us on to the next question, because for me, the questions are important to therefore try and understand stuff. The next question is, what is an octave? Now, we may well think that we know what an octave is, and an octave is an awful name for it, by the way. The octave is basically people who invented their heptatonic scale, where you've got 7 notes of a scale and the 8th is the octave. It shouldn't be called the octave. If we were to rename it, we'd call it something different that makes sense for other styles of music that don't use a 7-note scale system. But nonetheless, our ear perceives certain frequencies as being similar based upon their relationship to one another. Okay, this happens when one note has either half or twice the frequency as the original note. Okay, and we'll go through some examples of this. The new note sounds like a higher or lower version of that first note. Okay, to go through on that, and this is where I know this is where it's an imprecise way, but again, at least we can see and understand what we mean here. An A, the note A above middle C, has a frequency of 440 Hertz. That means the sound wave hits your eardrum 440 times a second. Our brain hears that as an A. If we listen to a frequency exactly half of that, so 220 hertz, we hear that as the same note. We hear it as an A, but it sounds like a lower version of the same note. This is in nature. This is nothing that anybody invented, okay? Like, nobody invented this. This is just like, we listen to this, and those notes to our brains sound the same, but they're like a higher and a lower version of one another. If we halve that frequency again, 110 hertz, that sounds like an A an octave lower. If we were to do a note of 880 hertz, doubling it, we would sound an A an octave higher. Okay, so first and foremost, the octave, as we see there, imagine that this is basically like a guitar string. Okay, basically this is a guitar string that is fastened at either end. Okay, and that's like basically the vibration that it goes up and down. If that was what the vibration looked like, that's 110 hertz. 220, the high pressure and the low pressure kind of they map together. So two waves fit in exactly the space of one, and therefore that is why they sound the same, because the frequency is twice as much. For 440, four waves fit into the space of one or into the space of two, so they sound similar, because really there is a direct mathematical relationship between the sound pressure hitting your eardrum. Okay, that's why octaves sound like octaves, and we can pick that out. We can pick out an octave, and they exist in nature. So we'll have heard them from, again, some of the earliest types of music were what's called diatonic. So potentially would have been mimicking of those sounds of nature, potentially two-note scales. So potentially that note there, and then the octave above, and that will have been some of the earliest form of music, which have been vocalizations of that there, an octave above, an octave down. So there'd only really been very little movement between those. Okay, obviously it's very difficult to know exactly that's the case, because we haven't got historical records of what that music sounded like of our distant ancestors. Okay, but these things exist in nature. Okay, so we haven't invented this. This is just, we perceive these things and we replicate those noises. Okay, if therefore, now this is where don't worry about this. I'm not an expert on this, but I'll just explain. If we take, and if I just go backwards slightly, if we imagine we've split this string here and like this frequency, we've doubled the frequency to 110 to 220, and we've doubled it again to 440. What happens if we triple it? As in, we fit 3 into 1.
Goes to 880.
Okay. So no. From the 1, if we go from 1 to 3, so we had 110 hertz, 220, and then we do 330, it's going to be a note between an A and another A an octave higher. Does that make sense? So if I was to say, okay, well, what happens if I go 110, 220, 330? Now it's not an A, because an A is 220 and the next A is 440, and it's in the middle. It's kind of in between the two, yeah? And this is another natural pitch, okay? And this is when you get into what's called the harmonic overtone series, okay? And I'm not going to spend huge amounts of time on this, but a lot of the notes that exist in our scale system, or in our, actually when we sing barbershop, they exist more so than in other types of Western music. So, for example, the note we would call a fifth is based upon, the fifth is based upon that 3 times multiplier. Okay, so actually 330 hertz in between 220 and 440 would to us sound like a fifth. It would sound like 5 notes up from that original A. Okay, that's where we derive the note of a fifth, because it's a natural overtone. I'm going to play you a video which you may have heard in a minute, but the fifth comes from there. As we keep on taking these multipliers, and you'll see that there, if you looked upon that 65 hertz, then to 130 to 260, you've got the doubling effect here from 260 to 520. But if you're going 1 times, 2 times, 3 times your original frequency, you get all these what's called harmonics, and these exist in nature. So you get your fifth, you get a major third, you get fifths, you get major seconds. It says here, and this is an interesting one, the 6th harmonic is a minor 7th higher, though it will be slightly out of tune, possibly unless you sing barbershop. But I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you look into overtones, barbershop is really into overtones, and there's a great, there's some great presentations. I was wondering in Harmony College last year by the current British quartet champs called Sound Hypothesis, which was explaining overtones and why we sing in a different tuning system to standard, because these overtones they stack up better. We sing properly and we tune ourselves based on what sounds right, not based on what the piano does. But again, all of this is a little bit too much info, so I'm not going to go into detail, but just know that there's quite a lot of the notes that we use are initially based upon nature. Okay, so initially the notes of our Western scales are an attempt, and note that I say an attempt, to recreate the fundamental relationship between those frequencies, the doubling, the tripling of fundamental frequencies and those natural harmonic overtones which exist within nature. Again, not the biggest expert on this, just presenting it so you kind of get a bit of background info. There's loads of very intelligent people with lots of big degrees who will have lots more information and can explain it really, really well. However, through the musical history, the work of Bach and others, there were some modifications, compromises and decisions taken that mean that the notes we use today, on a piano especially, are not quite the ones that exist in the natural harmonic overtone scale. Okay, so things like thirds, major thirds, are actually officially a compromise of an interval, harmonically speaking, which is why barbershoppers try to sing thirds slightly differently than you would on a piano. It's why if you listen to it's why chords lock and ring in barbershop, because we're matching these frequencies better than you would on a piano. I'm not saying piano, so pianos are kind of consistently out of tune, but for a very good reason. I'm not going to go into the reason now. It's all to do with being able to play in different keys so that you can therefore have one instrument that can play effectively in every key that you could possibly imagine. But to do that, you end up compromising slightly the interrelationship between these fundamental frequencies. Okay, so don't worry. But the thing is now, when I hear correct intervals, as in mathematically correct intervals, my brain thinks they're wrong because I'm so used to piano chord scale versions. Okay, so don't worry too much about this. There's a lot more information there, but we're going to move on just so you kind of know where scales come from. A lot of our notes come, therefore, as a recreation of natural harmonics that existed already. Now, we're not going to go into this, but in singing, we often try to tune to the overtone series more than we do to a piano. Which is why sometimes some choruses, if you're in barbershop choruses, they might use a piano or a keyboard, but often they don't, because sometimes a piano would say you're singing not the correct note, but you know that it feels right. You know when you just move that little bit of tuning and suddenly a chord just goes poof, and it locks in especially when you're singing a cappella unaccompanied, and you hear all these other notes that kind of spring out of nowhere. That's when you're really tuning those notes. And those harmonics are kind of matching up and forming notes that you're not singing, but it kind of makes you hear these notes because of this kind of these natural frequencies. So just very quickly, just before I go on to the next slide, and this is the thing. When you sing, you are singing multiple frequencies. Okay? So if I was to sing one note and I was to ask Debbie to sing the exact same note, would you be able to tell which was me and which was Debbie? If we just sang an R, would you be able to tell the difference between mine and Debbie's voice on the same note? Yes, probably you would. Okay? Debbie, can we attempt that, please?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to sing a note, then Debbie's going to sing a note, and I want you to see if there's a difference. We're going to do it to a nice pure R, Debbie. Sing the exact same note as me after me. Let's see if this works. Here we go. Here's my note. And you? Excellent. Now, did we both, first and foremost, did we generally both sing the same note? Yes, we did, more or less. I mean, you could maybe, if you put it through one of those little phone apps, you could say, oh, well, actually, you were 3 cents higher at that point. Yeah, but generally, we would perceive that as the same note. If we sang the exact same frequency, I would still not sound the same as Debbie. Okay? Now, this is because we all have our own harmonic fingerprint. Okay? Because my note, when I sing one note, there is the original, what's called the fundamental note that I'm singing. Okay? Ah. However, there's lots of other harmonic overtones which make my voice sound like my voice and make Debbie's voice sound like her voice. We have our own harmonic fingerprint. So if I can slightly, and I'll show you a woman who can do it very well in a second, I can slightly change my harmonic fingerprint by the aperture of my mouth. So I can take some of those overtones away, okay, and I can add some, or I can make you hear some more than others. So if I sing a note, ah, and I try and do something with it, ah, I'm slightly changing the vowel, but you notice that when it kind of goes out, the note sounds brighter, but it's the same fundamental frequency. Does that make sense? It's like if you hear a bass trying to sing high, it still sounds a bit like a bass. It doesn't sound like that bass suddenly has turned into an alto and suddenly has a lady's voice, okay? Because the harmonics of that person's voice is still there. Now, you can play around with this. So when you say about vocal placement, you can often send your placement somewhere else. I have naturally for a man, quite a forward placement, meaning I've got quite a lot of quite pingy overtones in my harmonic fingerprint, okay? Some men singing the same note as me would have less of those and might have more of this kind of lower sound. Neither, by the way, is better. There's not a thing about better, it's just different, okay? For certain types of music, you might want a certain type of voice, a voice that has a certain kind of fingerprint that works, okay? But I could make myself sound bassy. I mean, you can see I'm doing a silly face there, but suddenly all the brightness, all those bright tones in my voice are going just by the front of my mouth. Now, even if Debbie was to make her mouth shape exactly the same as mine, it still wouldn't sound the same, because where the vocal cords vibrate, everything from that point is different in me than it is Debbie. The length of my vocal tract is different than Debbie. The size and the resonating space in my head is different than Debbie. Everything that happens after the vocal folds is me. That's what makes me sound like me, okay? The vocal folds, if you actually put a microphone just above the vocal folds where the vibration happens, where they vibrate, etc., that doesn't sound very different. So Debbie's vocal folds on that note and my vocal fold on that note would sound very similar. Not identical, because her vocal folds would be a different size than mine, so there still would be some difference, but there would be very, 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 very similar if you were to listen to that sound at its initial point, okay? Everything else after that is what gives you your harmonic fingerprint, because it accentuates certain frequencies and allows certain frequencies through. It deadens certain frequencies, and we can, what you do with your tongue, your soft palate, all the stuff you get vocal coaches work with you on, is what they're trying to do. They're trying to move your voice into a place to either get rid of certain issues frequency wise, or accentuate certain things to make it match. And when you might have had barbershop coaches and they're always bang on about lead bass match, okay, getting your lead singer to match the bass singer, okay, thankfully sometimes that is slightly changing now, but actually we sound best when we're being our most efficient with our own voices, as opposed to make my bass, yeah, who has quite a not backwards in a bad way, but he has quite a kind of a slightly further kind of darker placed voice, and I have quite a far forward. The problem is if you push him forward, he's making himself put a lot of pressure, and actually he sounds then slightly pressured, so actually not forcing him to try and sing like me, okay? So again, vocal science is moving forwards all the time. So yeah, you may have had some coaching in the past where they've said, you know, lead bass match is where it's at. Yes and no. There's always like things change, and actually we want our voices to be efficient. But I will never sound like Debbie, and Debbie will never sound like me. I'm not sure who's more sad about that. But again, I think sometimes I'd like to sound like Debbie, and possibly sometimes she might like to sound like me. But it will never happen. We have our own voices. And again, that's why we always say you can only do the best that you can, is because you could try an awful long time to sound exactly like me or Debbie, and you would never sound like us. If you try to force your voice to sound like someone else's, that's not what your voice does. That's not how it sounds. And you just need to get your voice to sound its best, whatever that may be. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly reshare my screen and now move on to the next part where we actually get into scales. But I wanted to do that bit because if we don't understand a little bit of the background of what an octave is, yeah, it is something that exists in nature, as opposed to someone just decided, just mandatory, just randomly, oh yeah, let's just split it and just call that an octave, and we'll just tell people that's what it is. No, we can hear an octave. We call it an octave. It's just a doubling and a half or doubling of those frequencies. Now I'm just going to play this video. You may have seen this before. This is a woman called Anna Maria. She's very smug, but she's very talented, so she can be smug. She is what's called a polyphonic overtone singer. To explain what I mean by those overtones, she can filter her mouth to create two notes simultaneously and sing in harmony with herself. By the way, don't worry, this is not going to happen in the collective. It takes a long time to be able to do this. This is not our next kind of thing where we can only have two people, but you can have a quartet singing and only two people there. It doesn't work that way, okay? Not even if you... I think she might be a witch, so I think we might need to drown her at some point. But it will explain to you, and you can hear these overtones. The overtones she's creating are the ones that we find in nature. If you listen to some of them, some of them sound out of tune. If it sounds out of tune, that's because we think things that are in tune, they're actually out of tune. That's the compromises. She's singing the correct overtones that nature provides, and she is amazing. So let me just play. It's a few minutes long, this video, but you will definitely go and find more overtone singing after this point, because she is awesome. So have a listen. Can you... Oh, I'll just share my sound. Just let me know if you can hear this when it comes on. There's no sound at the moment, but just let me know when you can.
Hello, I am Anna Maria and I'm an overtone singer, and I'm going to tell you something about polyphonic singing today. Overtone singing is a voice technique where one person sings two notes at the same time.
So smug. Now, just very quickly, I'm just going to pause it at that point. She's actually doing that, okay? It's not like, I'm not going to get to the end of this video and say, ha ha, it was all a lie. It's been done with computer technology. You can tell that she's moving her mouth. All she's doing here, and I say all she's doing, she's basically changing her mouth and the shape inside her mouth to stop certain frequencies and to only let other frequencies through. So she's basically changing the harmonic fingerprint slightly of her voice, okay? So I will continue playing this. She is really doing this, by the way, okay? She is really doing this. So this is not a lie. It does exist. It's not fake news.
So this was the overtone scale on one fundamental. I can also choose an overtone and move the fundamental.
That one's not as easy to hear, but basically the overtone that she's creating is... So that note was in all of her notes. As she moved the fundamental, as in the main note she's singing, she's moving her mouth to keep that overtone consistent. Ridiculously hard. Ridiculously hard to do. Okay, here we go.
So...
Oh, what's today's it? 1 second. I'll just do that. Yeah.
So I can choose a fundamental and have the overtone scale, or I choose an overtone and have the undertone scale.
This is where she gets really smug.
If I want to sing a special melody, and there are melody notes that don't fit to the overtone scale from one fundamental, then I need to find another fundamental to sing this note. And for that, there are often different possibilities, and I choose this fundamental that fits harmonically best with the melody line. And for polyphonic singing, there are different possibilities to build scales and to move notes. So I can move the overtone with the fundamental in parallel. Or I can move the fundamental in steps. Or in smaller steps. Or even smaller. I can also move the overtone and the fundamental in the opposite directions. And that scale also works in major.
Major scale's harder for her. Major scale does not fit the overtone series as well.
And with these tools, I can sing, for example, folk songs.
She's going to sing a folk
solo
song
voice.
now, on her own. Well, without words.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Oh, she's just far too nice. So, yeah. So if you hadn't seen that before, it's real. She can do that. Okay. So that explains, I'll just quickly stop sharing for a sec. So when we say about overtones, that naturally exist, and all those overtones naturally exist in her voice. All she's doing there is filtering using the internal shape of her mouth and her lips to basically allow us to hear some of those notes like on their own, screamingly, like screaming out. Okay, but all those heart frequencies exist in her voice naturally, and they do in nature. And she's just worked on maximizing how we can hear and perceive those sounds. Okay, so when we say a harmonic fingerprint, all those frequencies are in your voice, in the same way that if I was to drop my brick on the floor, there's loads of frequencies. There are notes when I drop a brick on the floor. The issue is that there's so many frequencies that our brain does not perceive that as anything that is tuned. So the same with a drum, a snare drum. If you look at the frequency spectrum, if you were to hit a snare drum, it has loads of frequencies. Okay, and sometimes at the end of a snare drum, if someone hits it, you can kind of slightly pick out a note, but the initial hit, you don't hear a note because there's so many frequencies our brain picks it up as a noise as opposed to a note. Okay, and that's basically, yeah. So untuned percussion in an orchestra, they still have frequency, but the frequency is not like layered, and there is not a fundamental frequency that is being played or struck. There's just lots of frequencies all in one go, and we perceive that as noise. Okay, so it's all about how our brain hears things. Okay, so that's the first kind of thing which kind of explains frequencies and sound and stuff like that. We're now going to get onto scales, okay, which I know is what we're supposed to be getting onto, but I didn't want to not explain the original kind of where it comes from, okay, because it is fascinating, and she's a witch. What's a daisy? Yes. Where are we? Oh yeah, here we go. Now, here we get through, and I'm going to go through this in relatively quickly, but you know, I'll go through it hopefully in some detail. Now, in Western music, we didn't always have major and minor scales. Okay, that's the first thing to say. I could go back historically and talk about the use of modes and modes that preceded major and minor scales, but that would, whilst be interesting, would not necessarily help us with understanding key signatures, okay, which are derived from the major and minor scales. If you ever want to look into modes, modes still get used nowadays. So in certain types of like rock music and jazz music and stuff, they still use modes. Modal music is still a thing, but when we say scales, there are lots of types of scales. As I said at the beginning of this, the octatonic scale is a scale system that has 8 notes, not 7, like what we use today. There's pentatonic scale, which again also is used in different types of world music. There's the tetratonic scale, which is also used where that octave is split into 4 notes, or 5, or 6, or 7. And there's different types of scale systems used all around the world, where different cultures have decided to chop that octave, that fundamental distance between one note and the perceived higher version of the same note, to split it into different amounts. We have in Western music the chromatic scale, where it's split into 12. Okay, all of the, you know, some of them are based on fundamental frequencies, some of them are based upon compromises and decisions, which is why when you listen to, if you ever listen to any music play on a gamelan music, it sounds out of tune. So if you ever listen to like Indonesian or Bali, kind of gamelan from Bali or Indonesia, or kind of Java, you listen to it and it sounds out of tune to your ear, to my ears certainly. My westernized ears listen to Indonesian gamelan, and sometimes I kind of think, ooh, yeah, they need to tune that xylophone up a little bit, but it's not out of tune. It's in a different tuning system, of which people from that country are 100% used to, and our music would sound out of tune to them. Okay, so what we're talking about here is our scale system, and I say our from the point of view of a European westernized scale system, which is what we use still in barbershop, and it's what we use in classical music and popular music. Okay, it is not the only scale system, nor is it better. So major scale first. We're going to look at the major scale. The major scale is constructed with the formula, and again, a tone, by the way, is 2 semitones. I know if you're in America, you have whole tones and half tones. I'm going to use like a UK terminology. A semitone is a half step, a half tone for you. Okay, so a major scale is basically you start off on a note, you move up by a tone. That's 2 semitones. You move up by a tone, then by a semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Now don't worry about that, I'll go through an example of this. If we go through the C major scale, this is to start off scales, you can't understand key signatures if we don't understand scales. Because the whole reason we use sharps and flats is so we can maintain the sound of a major scale no matter what note we start on. That's what gives us sharps and flats in the first place. So a C major scale, our starting note is C, and you've got it there in the score and you've got it there on a piano. The next note is 2 semitones up, 1, 2. That's a tone. It's a tone up, full step. Then a semitone into an E, then a tone, then a tone, then a semitone from an E to an F, then a tone from an F to a G, another tone from a G to an A, another tone from an A to a B, and finally that last little movement between the 7th and the major and the octave, we get to our final semitone. Now that is the scale of C major, all the white notes. on a piano. Okay? Now, the scale came first. The piano came second. Okay? Generally speaking. Yeah, but imagine that. It's not that they invented a piano and then thought, oh, well, let's use a scale of just all these white notes on the piano. That seems the easiest thing to do, doesn't it? There was obviously, the piano was invented, and it was invented, and therefore we move that tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That's every major scale follows that pattern, no matter where it starts. And I'll give you an example of this, and you've got access to this PowerPoint presentation. The pattern exists with every major scale. If I was to start the E flat major scale, so hence instead of C being my starting note, it was an E flat, I'd start at an E flat and I would still have to move up a tone, and then a tone, and then a semitone, and then tone, tone, and otherwise it wouldn't sound like a major scale. A major scale being da 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 da. That's what a major scale sounds like. It wouldn't matter whether I moved down. Da 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 da. The gap between all those different notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to the 8, is always the same, no matter where I start. For that to happen, if we start on the note E flat, which is this little black note here, if we move a tone, so we count 2 steps, 1, 2, our second note is an F. If we then move 2, we get to a G. Then we move 1. That takes us to an A flat, not an A. So we end up using a black note, and we write the little flat symbol because it's not a standard white note A. We started on a black note E flat, because it's the black note just below E. We then end up on A flat, the black note just below A, so that we can keep the pattern of the major scale the same. If we move to a normal A, it wouldn't be a major scale because it wouldn't sound the same. Okay? And therefore, if you wrote a melody in C major, if you played that melody in E flat major, it should sound exactly the same, not sound different. Okay? Does that make sense? So you want it to sound the same when you move it up or down, like notes, so the starting note changes. That's the same thing. If we were to take for example, the White Cliffs of Dover that we did with the collective, our first song was originally a male arrangement. Okay, it was in a different key, and then I moved it up for collective. Well, if I moved it up for the collective, but the distance between the notes was then not the same, the melody would sound all wrong. Yeah. Instead of there'll be bluebirds over there'll be bluebirds over, it'd be like, oh, if I was ignoring the major scale and just stuck it with the same amounts of sharps and flats and just ignored scales, it would sound wrong. It wouldn't sound the same. Okay. We move from the A flat, 2 steps to a B flat. We then move to a C, to a D, to an E flat. That gives us here 3 flats. We don't count the E flat twice, by the way. So to make this E flat major scale sound the same as C major just has all the white notes. E flat major, to make it sound the same, ends up using 3 flats on the piano. So it sounds identical. Okay, it sounds like the same major scale, a couple of notes higher. Okay, C major scale sounds the same. Move it up a couple of notes, still sounds the same, still a major scale. In order for that to be the case, we have to use these flats. Question: why are we calling them flats, not sharps? Some of you might be thinking that. Deborah Linzer, what do you think?
It depends on what key it is. E
yes.
flat is also a D sharp, depending on what key you're in.
Yeah. Now, sometimes, again, if students at my school were to say, well, why is it an A flat and not a G sharp? The very simple way of saying this is, if we look at the chord of the scale of C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, every letter is used. A scale in our Western tradition, every letter has to be used. Does that make sense? So every letter has to be used. If it's a scale, it's moving by step. Every alphabetical letter has to be used. So in the scale of E flat major, we're basically going to go E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Okay? The fact that, and therefore, when we get to E, F, G, the fourth one is always going to be an A. It's going to be an A something. It's either going to be an A flat, or an A sharp. Okay? And those of you with a bit of theory knowledge, you might then go, what about double flats and double sharps? If you already know that, you shouldn't be here. I'm only kidding. So don't worry about that as well. I could explain that, but I'm not going to yet because it makes people's brains hurt. But really, in any scale, we have to have all the letters. It's just a simple matter of otherwise we've got two G's. We have E, F, G, G sharp. And then we don't have any A. We move from G sharp to like A sharp, and then we go straight to C. Well, there's no B in it. We've missed a note out. Does that make sense? So the simplest way of saying it, I always say to my students, is you just have to tick off every letter, because by its definition, wherever you start, if you can do an octave, you're going to have used all the letters from A to G in it somewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation.
Yeah. So you only just need to worry about, you're going to get a G. It might be a G sharp. It might be a G. It might be a G flat. And then that's as long as you tick off one of each of those letters, then that's why we need to use sharps. And that's why in this example, it's all flats, because that's the way. I mean, it's all flats because we start on E flat. So there'll be no scale, major minor scale, which starts in a major scale that starts on a flat and then uses sharps. If it starts on a flat, it's going to use flats. Okay? And you're not going to get a scale, generally speaking, in this, that uses sharps and flats simultaneously. Okay? In the major scale. Minor's a little bit different, but we'll get to that in a bit. There's a little thing with the pesky harmonic minor, which we need to deal with. Okay? So that's the E flat major scale. Follows exactly the same pattern as a C major scale, and you could form any major scale as long as the pattern goes tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That's all you need to know. If you follow the same pattern, it will sound like a major scale, and you will pick up black notes at some point. Okay? To give an example with D major is one that is going to force us to use sharps, not flats, because our first note is D. We then move to E. The next note is going to be an F, because that's the next note that's the next letter in the alphabet. We know it's going to be an F something. However, we've got to move a tone. So it's going to end up on that black note, which could either be an F sharp or a G flat, but it's the third note, D, E, F. It's going to be an F sharp because it's the third note. We have to use an F, so it's going to be an F sharp. The next note takes us to a G. The semitone jump to a G. A tone takes us to an A. Another tone takes us to a C. The next jump is another full tone jump, C sharp. The black note in between C and D, but we're not going to have a D flat in the scale of D. That would be weird, because you've got two Ds then. One of them is a D and one of them is a D flat. So you'd have a C sharp there. So the scale of D has got two sharps, F sharp.
I mean, you're not sharing your screen. Do you think you're sharing your screen? Because you're not.
I did, yes. My apologies. Sorry. So just very quickly, as I was just showing there, D into an E, the full step into F sharp, because we're following the pattern. A small step into G, full step to A, full step to B. The last full step takes us to this little black note here, which could be a C sharp or a D flat, but it's a C sharp because we've already used D, because it's the scale of D. We're not going to use D flat and D in the same scale, because we then wouldn't have used a C at all, and we'd be breaking our use all the letters of the alphabet from A to G in what we're doing. Okay? You could do that in any scale you choose, as long as you follow tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That's it. Okay? Now, it is, as it says here, it's possible to build any major scale, start on the first note, follow the formula. So we could, for example, start on the note C sharp and follow it through, and we would find out that we use every single sharp. Okay? C sharp major uses all the sharps. Hooray. So, Yeah, that's the one. If I'm in an orchestra, it's singing, it's not an issue. You'll notice as well, when you're singing, you don't care what the key is because the sharps and flats are not more. It's not more difficult to sing an F sharp than it is an F. Apart from obviously vocal range, but it's not like if you see a piece of music that's in like E flat or in D, it's not like, oh, I don't like flats, I much prefer singing in sharps. It makes no difference to singers. It makes a massive difference to orchestral players and instrumentalists. Like on a violin, I like playing in flat keys. I don't like playing in sharp keys. Okay, I'm as a violinist. Okay, I love playing in E flat. E flat's brilliant. Okay, the idea of playing in F sharp on a violin, F sharp major on a violin, no thank you. No, I can't use my open strings for a start. No, I don't want to. And there'll be other instrumentalists will not like certain keys, so certain instruments. But for singers, we're lucky. Keys don't, apart from affecting our range, so you might say, well, there's a big difference for me singing in F sharp than G because I can't sing G. It's too high. But actually, there's no difference in actually apart from vocal range, there's no difference in us singing in C sharp minor to C minor. If it's within our range, there's no difference. Okay, we don't really worry, we just sing it. Unless we're a particular score reader, and then we sometimes get more accidentals and things, and we might think it's a little bit messy when we're singing something with 7 sharps in the key signature. It just seems a little bit like excessive. The arranger could have just moved it down by 1 semitone, we're in C major instead, then we've got no sharps and no flats, and then and also it's a semitone lower, so it's easier to sing. Anyone who gives you an arrangement in 7 sharps, just shake your head and know that they think they're really clever. Unless it's David Wright, he is really clever. Don't question him. So, now, we're going to go through minor scales. Is there any question about major scales at this point? I don't think there probably will be, but generally, it's a pattern. It's a pattern that was decided upon that sounds like a major scale. Okay? Mike Schilder.
And you might get into this later, but for me, the challenge with scales has always been, if I'm looking at sheet music, I can look at the signature and going like, this is the scale with 1 F sharp in it. Yeah. But don't ask me what scale that is. Like the scale is defined by the starting note. Yeah. But to me, the starting note seems almost irrelevant. What I need to know is that there's an F sharp. So I just do all the notes as normal, but with any time that I see an F, it's actually an F sharp. Yeah. But I've never really successfully found any kind of mnemonic to translate that into what scale is this actually in. It's the scale with F sharp in it. Yeah. 100% that gets covered. So yeah, we're gonna hopefully get a little bit of nugget, and you'll be like, okay, cool. Now I'm gonna go through minor scales, folks. I'm gonna say that you might want to go through this in a little bit more detail yourself, because I'm mindful of time and I really want to get to the key signature bit. Major scales we define as sounding happy. Okay, it's a horrible way of defining them, but we do define them as happy. Major scale sounds happy. I hate myself for saying it, but for the moment it will suffice. Major, happy. Minor, even worse, sad. I've heard major music which is very sad and minor music which sounds beautiful and happy, but let's not worry too much about that at the moment. There are 3 types of minor scale. Okay? Now, you might think to yourself, why? I'm not going to go into that, apart from to say that there is a reason, and it does make a difference, but it's not the remit of this education session. Okay? The remit is to try and get to key signatures and to give us a brief understanding of this information. There is reasons why we use natural minor. There's reasons why we want to use harmonic and the melodic minor. And as you would imagine, harmonic minor generally is used when we're constructing chords and harmony. Melodic is usually for melody lines. And there is historical context. There's quite a lot of information about why this is the case. I'm not going to be able to cover all of those reasons. That will be a different education session entirely, the minor scales. But yeah, just to kind of say, I know it, but I'm not going to go through it all now. Now, the first thing is, the most important scale for you to kind of understand initially is the natural minor. The natural minor goes tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. And actually, it is the key signature version of a minor scale. Okay, and I'll get to that later. It's the key signature version. So if we build an A natural minor scale, it uses all the white notes of the piano. Okay, it also defines itself very close to a mode called the Aeolian mode, which is what the A minor scale was derived from. Don't worry about that, but safe to say the A natural minor scale is, yeah, it's the A natural minor scale, and it follows this pattern. And that's the one we need to learn. And then when we get to harmonic and melodic, we just learn how we change how we change the natural minor scale as opposed to its completely different scale. We always start with natural minor, then we modify. So an A natural minor scale, our starting note will be, not surprisingly, an A. Be great if the scale of A natural minor wasn't an A. That would be an interesting call. So it's an A. We then move up to a whole tone to B. So it's just like the major scale, apart from we use a different pattern. We move by different notes. We end up at the same point at an octave, but the steps, the lot of half steps and whole steps are different. So it ends up having a different kind of flavor. So we start off with a tone. We then go to a semitone move up to C. We then move up to a D with our whole tone. And you'll notice at the moment all the white notes are being used. There's no sharps or flats in this. Another whole tone takes us up to the E. A semitone goes up to the F, a whole tone to the G, and we finish off with another whole tone. We therefore see that A natural minor is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Follows the same rules of the major scale when we said a scale has to use all the notes of all the letters of the alphabet from A to G. The minor scales have to do exactly the same. So they still have to follow and use every letter of the alphabet from A to G at some point. Okay?
Simon?
Yes.
So I learned that C major, the relative minor is A minor.
Correct.
Is it different? It's natural equals relative? It's just like...
Yes. So A minor is the relative minor of C, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But just to say at the moment, when we say relative minor, basically the white notes, A natural minor uses all the white notes, and so does C major. So therefore we call them relatives because they use all the same notes. So A minor uses exactly the same notes as C major. They sound very different, but they are called the relative minor. A minor is the relative minor. Now, when we talk about A minor, we don't refer to A minor as a harmonic minor or a melodic minor or a natural minor. It's just in music, A minor. However, as we'll see in a little bit, sometimes you may get certain notes in a piece of music that's in A minor, which might not fit with the key signature, the accidental of G sharp, which we're going to look at later on, which suddenly pops up in the piece of A minor when we're following the harmonic minor scale, which we'll go through that in a second. But yeah, you're 100% right. A minor is the relative of C, and there's a way of working out the relative for every key that's very simple that I'll do in a moment. So if we look at, and we're going to just use C natural minor now because we can compare C natural minor to the next lot. So I've just transitioned to C natural minor. It follows the same pattern as A natural minor: tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. It has 3 flats. Okay, as it walks up using every letter of the alphabet on its way, it picks up those 3 flats of E flat, A flat, and B flat. Okay, and we would therefore give it the idea of the second note of the scale, third, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and then the octave. So the first note is note 1, or the tonic. We then get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 or 1, the octave. Okay, so when I might talk about the 7th of the scale, that's just the 7th step, or the 5th would be the 5th step. When we count intervals, the first note we start on is number 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we get back to note number 1 with the 8th. Now, if we look at the harmonic minor, all it does is you raise the 7th note by a semitone. Okay? Now, if I was to sing you a standard natural minor, da 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 da. Okay, da 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 da. Sounds like slightly mournful, but fine. The harmonic minor is exactly the same until the penultimate note. Da 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 da. You get that leading note, that leading note. Da da. You get that in there. Okay. Now, if I was to sing the natural minor, it's a lot more. Yeah, it's used a little bit more in slightly more like, again, it sounds a bit more kind of impressionistic. It's not quite what kind of like Debussy or kind of would use, but it has a little less pull. The natural minor has less reactivity and pull. The harmonic minor becomes very, that risen seventh has loads of power to it. So here's the natural minor. Da, 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 da. It's very flowing. It has a sense of kind of water. It has a flow at the top. Da, 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 da. Okay, it's like, yeah, nice. Harmonic. Da, 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 da. It has a. It's got a lot more kind of. Now, some people, my students would listen to that and go, sounds like Egypt music. Okay. Now, there's something in that, but probably it sounds like the westernized version of what they think music might have sounded like from that neck of the woods. Not that actually. So it's very, very not like Egypt music, but there is the basically that what that forms is what's called, and I won't go into detail on this too much, it gives an augmented second. An augmented second is the same as a minor third, but it's not. So it does have that kind of Middle Eastern kind of flavor to it, because the augmented second is used in music of those countries more so than it is in a lot of Western classical music tradition. Again, not an expert on world music, but that's why it does have a slightly oriental feel to it, that kind of like Middle Eastern kind of vibe going on because of the augmented second. So what a harmonic minor does is it makes, again, don't worry too much about this, some of you might know this, if you're in a minor key, chord 5, like the fifth chord, chord number 5, in harmonic minor is still a major chord, not a minor chord. Okay, that's because the major 5 chord always wants to take you back to chord 1. So it's all about what's called the tonic dominant relationship, which I won't go into now because that's not chords and we're not on chords yet. But there is a reason why the harmonic minor is used, is because when you use a major chord 5, a major dominant, it gains loads of extra energy and pushes that through into chord 1. Whereas if you use the natural minor, you use minor 5 chord, it kind of can drift. It doesn't feel like it needs to go back to chord 1. And if you're a composer, your job is generally to keep on taking you back to chord 1 before taking you on a journey around the chords again, which then end up back on chord 1. So there was reasons behind that, and that's a very generic description of why they use the harmonic minor, but just safe to say there is reasons. So the harmonic minor is what would give you, and I'll just quickly stop sharing my screen for a second, harmonic minor would give you sharps or flats in your score. So Deborah was saying about A minor, and the A minor shares its key signature with C major. 100% it does. However, if you ever look at a piece of music and it's in A minor, it randomly at some points will have G sharps. It'll have sharps in the piece of music because it's following the harmonic minor when it's looking at chords, and G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G is the 7th note of that scale, and a sharpened G will be at a G sharp. And that's why you see these odd sharps in a piece of music. Not always, but so if I'm teaching music to my students, I'll look at a piece of music, there's nothing in the key signature, but suddenly I look and there's sharps. And it's not changing key. If those sharps happen to also be the 7th note of that scale, it's in a minor key. And for my students, I often say, if you're not sure whether a piece of music is in a major or a minor key, 1, look at the note it starts on. 2, look at the note it finishes on. If it finishes on an A, it starts on an A, you might be in A minor, not C major, okay? But also, if there's loads of little sharps in it, and those sharps are generally G sharps, much more likely that you're going to be in A minor. If you can see accidentals in a piece of music, and it's a relatively simple piece of music that doesn't have lots of key changes, and usually an arranger will put the key change in the music for you, so you'll know that's not it. If you get lots of accidentals, you're probably in a minor key, okay? And we'll look at how you would decide upon that in a second, okay? So that's the harmonic minor. The melodic minor, as we would imagine with the name of it, is used more so in melodies. The melodic minor, you basically raise both the 6th and the 7th, okay? Again, there's reasons. I'm not going to go into the why at the moment. I'm just going to say it is the case. So to convert C natural minor to C melodic, you raise the 6th and the 7th, and it ends up finishing like a major scale. It starts off minor and ends up sounding a bit major. Here's what it sounds like. Natural minor first, then I'll sing the melodic minor. Natural first. Da, 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 da. Back to our kind of flowing, slightly sad water. Yeah? Melodic minor. Da, 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 da. Okay? I didn't do it descending because that often isn't used. So melodic minor on the way up again. Da, 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 da. Those little rises and lifts, it ends exactly the same as a major scale, okay? But it starts off as minor. So it kind of has the sense of minor. It starts you off in sad town, but then actually it lifts itself up on the other notes, and it's about as major as a minor scale gets. However, melodic minor is only used when you're going up. When you go down, they usually then use the natural minor scale. And this is when I played the violin, I hated melodic minors to play them, because melodic minor, you had to move your fingers on the way up and then move them on the way down. It wasn't symmetrical. And to my mind, a scale that's not symmetrical should be burned. Okay, especially with I wasn't very good with my fingering on my violin because I got fat fingers and my violin was dinky. It's like you wouldn't imagine I'm a violinist. It was like, I hated melodic minor scales. I always wanted them to say harmonic because that was easy. No worries. Melodic, hated it. Here's melodic up, and it turns into natural minor on the way down. Have a listen. Da 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 da. It sounds lovely. It has a rise on the way up, and it then has a fall on the way down, which gives it a real romantic edge. It doesn't sound like water. It sounds a lot more kind of flowing and kind of romantic. It sounds like a bit more passionate, okay? It's like I have to perform that scale, okay? That's the melodic minor scale. It just marginally changes the pattern, but all you need to remember is the natural minor has its pattern, which I'm not going to say now because I'll probably get the pattern wrong, but the one you've already written down, it does follow the same pattern for natural. For harmonic, you only raise the 7th to give it that kind of Middle Eastern feel, because it really works better with chords. For melodic, you raise the 6 and the 7 on the way up only. Okay, and you don't need to worry, because if you're unless you're composing music, you don't need to worry about this. But just to say, if people talk about the different types of minor scale, by the way, this doesn't change the key signature. So the melodic minor does not change the key signature. It doesn't suddenly mean that you end up having to change your key signature. Your key signature always is based upon the natural minor scale. None of this stuff changes the key signature. If you're using melodic, it will put it in the score as accidentals. It will put sharps or naturals or flats or whatever it wanted to do to make those melodic or harmonic changes within the score. It would not change the key signature, okay? So that's scales. What about key signatures? This is how far we've had to go so far just to get to key signatures. If I just started on key signatures, I would hate myself, because it wouldn't take very long, but you wouldn't understand why. There would be no, the key signatures are only needed because we have to keep the same pattern when using major and minor scales, which is why sharps and flats get used, okay? And there is a pattern to this. The pattern is, this is where I like this bit, because it's easy, it makes sense, and it just means you can remember a couple of bits of info and impress your friends. Sharps and flats are always added to music in the same order. Always. In a key signature. They add in the same order. Always. Okay? The sharps always start with an F. So if you've got a piece of music and it has one sharp in the key signature, that will always be an F sharp. There will never be a piece of music where it's got an A sharp in the key signature and it's only got one sharp. If it has an A sharp, it'll have 5 sharps because it'll have 4 sharps before. So they always get added in the same order. Always. And I didn't know this until I was in my degree and someone mentioned it. No one bothered to teach me this in GCSE. My teacher never told me. My violin teacher never told me that the sharps got added in a certain order. I hadn't really worked it out myself. I'd never really cared that much. But I wasn't told. And it annoyed me when I found out because I'm like, that would have made it so much easier to remember, because I had to memorize my key signatures without using the little trick I'm going to give you today. I had to memorize the darn things. And I didn't like doing that. It took time. And there's a really easy way of doing it. Flats always go B, E, A, D, G, C, F. Always. They always get added to a piece of music. B goes first. B flat's the most common flat used. Then E flat, and A flat, and D flat, and G flat, C flat, F flat. If you get an F flat in your key signature, you've got 7 flats. And again, get a different arranger. That's all I'm saying, okay? They're trying to be fancy-fangled, okay? Oh, if anyone ever, by the way, says to you the joke, I really like music in B sharp major. B sharp major, by the way, is C major and has no sharps and flats. Yeah? Shake your head. They're trying to be clever. Yeah? But just don't rise to it. Don't rise to their B sharp major bad pun. Okay? Music theory puns are the worst puns. Okay? Just letting you know that. And by the way, if you've ever used that joke that you like music in B sharp major, for shame on you, sir or madam. So, sharps. You only need to remember this rhyme. Father Charles goes down and ends battle. That's the order of the sharps. Father Charles goes down and ends battle. That's the sharps and how they get added. Father Charles goes down and ends battle. Okay? Thankfully, there are other ones. Father Christmas got like David an Electric Blanket or something. That one's not as good. The reason Father Charles goes down and ends battle is better is because flats, battle ends and down goes Charles's father. It's exactly the same. You can reverse it. So Father Charles goes down and ends battle. That's the order you add the sharps. The flats get added. Battle ends and down goes Charles's father. That's how you remember the order of the flats. That's why I like that one, because you only need to remember one thing. Okay? And so that's the order of the flats. So reverse order. So the first flat is the last sharp to be added. Okay? Now, I'm just going to leave that there for you because some people are writing. Again, you'll have access to this PowerPoint. And here comes the truths that make people feel better than you, but they're not. Okay? Here's the info. You only need to learn 2 key signatures. That's it. And you will be able to work out the rest of them. You only need to remember that C major has no sharps and flats. And that F major has 1 flat. They are the only 2 you need to memorize. Everything else, you can use the following trick, the following very simple thing that works for every single key signature. Okay? So C major, none. F major, 1 flat. If you have any sharps in a key signature, find the last sharp, the one that's furthest to the right, go up by 1 semitone. That is your major key. Always. So if you have that F sharp in that piece of music, and there's only 1 sharp, 1 semitone above F sharp is G. It's G major. If you have 4 sharps, Father Charles goes down. 4th sharp is a D, so if it's a D sharp, 1 semitone up from D sharp is E. E major has 4 sharps. Okay? If you go 5 sharps, Father Charles goes down and A sharp is your 5th sharp. 1 semitone above A sharp is B. B major has 5 sharps. So 7 sharps is no more difficult than 1 sharp, yeah, to work out. So 7 sharps, Father Charles goes down and ends battle, B sharp. 1 note semitone above C sharp. This is where you might get it wrong. What note is B sharp, did we say previously? It's a C. What's 1 note above C? A C sharp. C sharp major has 7 sharps. Okay? So even at the 7, as long as you remember that a B sharp is a C, you might want to, yeah, the only thing you really need is a picture of a keyboard with the notes on. A B sharp, there is no black note between B and C. B sharp is basically a C, yeah, just by any other name. 1 semitone above, C sharp. C sharp major has 7 sharps. Now, that's it. That literally is all your key signatures in sharps. You just find the last sharp, up 1 semitone, that is your major key. Now, let's just quickly go through. I'm just going to go through and do a couple of these. I won't do many, but again, and this is here for you, music theory exercises key sig. Now, I'll just drag, this will load up probably on the wrong screen. Oh, it's right on the right screen. Now, oh, my web browser is outdated. Oh, well, it is because it's that one. Okay, so.
Simon?
Yes.
Is that the same for flats? Finding flat
no
key signatures?
I'll do sharps first and then we'll do
okay.
Flats is just as easy. Actually, flats is easier in my opinion. So 1 second. Key signatures. Okay, now this you can customize your thing so it will only give you the ones you want. So here we go. Yes, so here's our first question. Now your job is to follow what I just said. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sharps. We don't even need to read music because we just count. Father Charles goes down and ends battle. The last sharp is a B sharp. Okay? 1 semitone above a B sharp is a C sharp, so it is C sharp major. That's correct. Next one. How many sharps are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sharps. Father Charles goes down and. The 5th sharp is A sharp. Even if you don't read music, you can still work this out. A sharp. 1 semitone above A sharp is a B. Therefore, the key signature is B major. Correct. Next one. 7 sharps. The more you do this, the more you'll remember. But let's just go through it. Father Charles goes down and ends battle. 1 semitone of a B sharp is a C, is a C sharp major. 2 sharps. Father Charles. 1 semitone above a C sharp is a D. It's D major. Now, you can go through that for as long as you like, but the same rule will never let you down. That one, 4 sharps. 1 semitone above the last sharp, a D sharp, is an E. That's E major. The next one, that's 5 sharps. It's B major because Father Charles goes down and 1 semitone above an A is a B. So it's B major. 7 again, C sharp. And the more you do this, the more you'll just get to know, okay? You'll just get to learn and you'll just get to go, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, 6. We haven't done 6 yet. Father Charles goes down and ends. E sharp is an F. 1 semitone above an F is an F sharp major. Okay, so that's the first thing on that. Mike.
So the C sharp and F sharp are the only 2 options being given here for scales starting on the sharp. Yes. But like D sharp exists. I could start to scale on the D sharp.
Yes, you could. But most of the time, if you had a piece of music in D sharp major, it is more likely that it would be written in E flat major because it has less flats than you would have sharps. But
so that's when we get flats.
Okay. Yeah. So if you had D sharp major, you could write a piece of music in D sharp major, 100%. But it would have loads and loads of sharps, and actually it's exactly the same enharmonically as E flat major, whereas E flat major only would have 2 flats, whereas D sharp major would have tons tons and tons and tons of sharps in it, so it's more likely you would find that piece of music in E flat major than D sharp. So the only sharp keys in major you would find normally are C sharp major with 7, F sharp major with 6 sharps. But no, good question. That is true. But you very rarely would find other sharp keys. Normally they'd be flat keys. So flat signatures. Find the penultimate flat. That is your major key. You don't even have to count. Penultimate, the one before the last. That's why F major with 1 flat, there's only 1 flat, so there is no penultimate, because there's only 1. That's the only reason you need to learn F major, because there's only 1 B flat. So again, testing test time. So flats, you only need, and I'll do flats now, and we'll go through and I'll show you, you only need to find the penultimate, the one before last. That is always your key. So we have 4 flats, okay? Battle, ends, and down. Take one away, battle, ends, and A flat. 4 flats is A flat major. Battle, ends, and down. Take 1 off, we're back onto the A, it's A flat. That one has 7 flats. Battle, ends, and down goes Charles's father. If we go 1 off, we're back on Charles's C. So it's C flat. Okay? C flat. C flat. Okay? Next one, 6. Battle, ends, and down goes Charles's. What's before Charles's? Down goes Charles's G. G flat. Next one, 3 flats. Battle, ends, and take 1 off. We're back to the E flat. So it's E flat. Penultimate flat is your key. Oh, there's no flats there. What on earth could that be? C. That's the only one you need to learn. C. C has none. That one, 6. What's our penultimate flat? It's our G flat. It's G flat major. And again, you could go on all day, but the same pattern goes through. It's given us C major again. No sharps and flats. We need to memorize that. I'm sorry, I couldn't find a way of making that one easy, but really you just have to memorize that C major is none. The rest of it is all workoutable. Next question. So first things first, to work out a minor key, you always work out major first. Okay? Then you go down by 3 semitones. That is your minor key. Work it out as major, count down by 3. And I'm going to bring up a keyboard in a second. The only thing you will ever need to do, the most you'll ever need to do, is have a picture of a keyboard either in your brain or on a piece of paper or on your phone. Okay? That's all you'll ever need to do. You only ever go down by 3 semitones. Okay? And as we said earlier, if you see accidentals in the music, it might mean the piece is in a minor key. I'll say might because it doesn't always mean, because sometimes if you get something that's jazzy, you might get kind of blue notes and jazz notes in there, and they might mean you have other accidentals in there. But often if you've got the same accidental in there and it keeps on popping up, it may well be that you're in a minor key. Now let's just quickly, I will just quickly show you. Now on that website, which is musictheory.net, free website by the way, the musictheory.net, if you go onto the thing that says tools, it will give you a pop-up piano. Tools, pop-up piano. It then gives you a pop-up piano. Not surprisingly, considering it called pop-up piano, it pops up a piano. Now I can therefore, and you can play it. How cute. However, the best thing is you can count down 3 semitones. So if therefore you're here and I said, okay, I'm in C major, no sharps and flats, what is my relative minor? I count down by 3. A. That's an A. Now, you might want to write that down on a piece of paper if you don't know the notes on a piano, but you can get pictures of a piano or the notes of a piano, and then you can work that out. So if I just click that, that's a G sharp. Let's call it a G sharp for the moment. So G sharp major. What is the, and G sharp major isn't one you use. You probably would actually use A flat major. Let's follow the rules properly and say it's A flat major. A flat major, go down by 3. 1, 2, 3. F minor is the relative minor of A flat major. Now, I haven't yet worked out in my head what those are. How would I work it out though? Well, A flat. How would I work out how many flats are in the key of A flat? Add 1 flat to the rhyme. Okay? Battle, ends, and down. 4. So you can work my rhyme, my little thing out, not only to work out what a key signature is, but to work out how many flats or sharps a key signature has, a scale has. So if I think, okay, I'm in A flat major, how many flats do I have in A flat major? How am I supposed to work that one out? Well, you just follow it through. Remember, the penultimate is A flat. Add 1 more flat in the correct order. Battle, ends, and down. A flat major has 4 flats. And then you also can, once you've worked out the relative minor, you can also say that F minor has 4 flats because you've used that other rule. It's exactly the same with sharps. If I say, and someone said, yeah, we're in A major. We're in A major. Well, how many sharps does A major have then? Or how many flats does A major have? Right, well, okay, A major, what would you do? You go down by 1 semitone. Down by 1 semitone is G sharp. You then go Father, Charles, goes. 3. So A major has 3 sharps. Does that make sense? So you can use the you can do that rhyme either way. You can either use it by looking at a piece of music and then working out what key signature that is. So 3 sharps is A major, or you can go from A major, go down by 1 semitone for a G sharp, count up Father Charles goes, and you'll know that A major has 3 sharps. So you can work it out either way. Okay, it does take a little bit of work, but all you actually need to remember, final sharp, up by 1 to find the key. Okay, unless you're trying to work out how many sharps a key has, and then you go down by 1 semitone. But you'll know if you're looking at the music, up by 1 semitone to find your key in a major key. If you're wanting to know how many flats or sharps a piece of music has, then you go up by 1 semitone. Then you go, down by 1 semitone. So opposite way. I said it the wrong way around there. My apologies. If you're looking at a piece of music, you go up by 1 semitone to find your key. If you're singing a piece of music, or someone says, "Oh yeah, we're in G major," and you go, eh? If they tell you a key and you want to know how many sharps or flats, G major, you go down by 1 semitone. F sharp is your first sharp, 1 sharp in G major. Okay, the flats is exactly the same. You just need to remember the penultimate flat is your key. So E flat major, battle, ends, and. You always go 1 further. That's if you want to know how many flats is in E flat major, if it's a named one. If you look at a piece of music and it's got 3 flats, battle, ends, and, you take off 1, so you get your penultimate flat, and that is your key. E flat major has 3 flats. To work out a minor, go down by 3. So those bits of information. Now, you might think, well, you could have saved me an hour and a half, mate, and you could have just told me that in 20 minutes, put it on a PowerPoint presentation, I could have saved myself an afternoon. Okay. However, if you don't understand where scales come from, to understand where something else comes from, it still is, it's making something mysterious that is not supposed to be mysterious, if that makes sense. Like, none of this stuff is mysterious. It's all logical. All music generally follows patterns and logical patterns. Okay, it's why people say, I don't always agree with it, music and maths are quite closely kind of linked. Again, I hate maths though, and I love music, so I sometimes don't agree that music and maths are linked because I don't like maths. I don't not like it. I'm just not very good at it, and I'm not interested in it. I think I don't like the mathematical part of music as much as the creative part. So I would say that music is related to music more than it is to maths. But it is true that music is logical. It follows patterns. It follows rules, and in that way, it is like maths. The fact that chords and further things like the circle of fifths and chords and interrelationships and intervals, they're all based around mathematical principles which are based upon logic. There's nothing haphazard about any of this. Major scales always follow the same pattern. Minor scales follow the same pattern. You know, harmonic minor always raises the seventh. Melodic raises 6 and 7 on the way up, but not on the way down. Yeah, there's quite a lot of rules, but they all have logic and reason behind them. And I don't want you to be thinking that, you know, I don't want you to be sitting there wondering who came up with scales. Why is an octave an octave? Who decided that that was an octave? Who decided that, you know, where does that come from? That was the questions I asked at school, and I got told to shut up because my teacher didn't want to tell me those answers, probably because they didn't know themselves. But I just got very frustrated that I wasn't told the why. I was told the rule, but not where it came from, and I never liked that. So, are there any questions at this point? I'm going to stop recording now, but I will do some Q&A if you've got any questions. And remember, no question is stupid. No question is stupid, okay? So